It all started on a bright summer morning in the quaint suburban neighborhood of Maplewood Hills. The birds chirped melodiously, lawns were meticulously manicured, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air. But beneath the picturesque facade, a storm was brewing. A storm named Karen. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of Maplewood Hills, was the president of the HOA and took her duties with military precision, from issuing fines for garbage bins left out past 7 p.m. to enforcing a strict color palette for front doors. Karen prided herself on maintaining order. To her, Maplewood Hills wasn't just a neighborhood, it was her kingdom. Enter me, Alex Carter, an independent spirit who'd recently purchased a charming bungalow in the neighborhood. Unlike my neighbors, I wasn't particularly fond of strict rules. My house stood out with its bright turquoise door and a garden teeming with wildflowers, a stark contrast to the regimented rose bushes and beige hues of the other homes. My aesthetic choices didn't sit well with Karen. "It's an eyesore," she declared at the next HOA meeting, glaring at me as if I'd personally offended her. "Maplewood Hills has standards." I shrugged, offering a polite smile. "I like it, and I don't think it's against the HOA guidelines." Karen's eyes narrowed. "It's not about the guidelines, Alex. It's about harmony." From that day forward, Karen made it her mission to make my life a living nightmare. She began small, sending warning letters for trivial infractions. My mailbox was an inch too tall, my recycling bin wasn't perfectly aligned with the curb, and my grass was half an inch too long. At first I laughed it off. Surely she'd grow tired of this ridiculous campaign. But Karen was relentless. One morning, I woke to find a notice taped to my front door. It was a formal complaint from the HOA, citing excessive eccentricity in my home's appearance. It demanded I repaint my door within 2 weeks and trim the chaos in my garden. My amusement turned to anger. "This is absurd," I muttered, crumpling the notice and tossing it into the trash. I wasn't about to let a petty tyrant dictate how I expressed myself. Still, I decided to confront her directly. Karen's house was the largest on the block, a pristine white colonial with a perfectly symmetrical lawn. As I rang the doorbell, I could hear the muffled sound of classical music and the barking of her tiny, yappy dog, Snickers. Karen opened the door, her expression cold and unwelcoming. "Alex," she said, crossing her arms. "To what do I owe this visit?" "We need to talk about these complaints," I said, holding up a copy of the notice. "This is harassment." Karen's lips curled into a smug smile. "It's enforcement. The rules exist for a reason. If you can't abide by them, perhaps Maplewood Hills isn't the neighborhood for you." Frustration boiled over. "You can't just bully people into submission, Karen." Her eyes flashed with indignation. "I'm not bullying anyone. I'm protecting the integrity of this community." I walked away, knowing I wouldn't get through to her. But if she thought I'd back down, she had another thing coming. Over the next few weeks, Karen's vendetta escalated. She called in noise complaints over my late-night backyard barbecues, accused me of improper waste disposal, and even reported my cat Milo for wandering unsupervised. Each time, I defended myself with evidence and logic, but it was exhausting. Then came the final straw. I had decided to install a small above-ground pool for the summer. It was nothing extravagant, just a modest addition to make the scorching afternoons more bearable. But Karen saw it as an affront to her authority. The day the pool arrived, Karen marched over, clipboard in hand. "This pool is in violation of HOA regulations," she declared. "Show me where it says that," I challenged, folding my arms. Karen faltered, flipping through her documents. "It's implied." I laughed, shaking my head. "That's not how rules work, Karen." Her face turned a deep shade of red. "You'll regret this, Alex." I brushed her off, thinking it was just another empty threat. But Karen was true to her word. A week later, I returned home to find security personnel standing in my driveway. Karen stood beside them, a triumphant smirk on her face. "We're here to ensure compliance," she announced. My heart sank as I realized the extent of her vendetta. This wasn't just about a pool or a door color. Karen was determined to destroy my home and drive me out of the neighborhood. But I wasn't about to let her win. The first wave of Karen's onslaught came in the form of an emergency HOA meeting, hastily convened to discuss my alleged violations. Flyers for the meeting were stuffed into every mailbox on the street, each emblazoned with the ominous header, "Preserving the Harmony of Maplewood Hills." I attended, of course. The community hall was packed, with curious neighbors whispering among themselves. Karen took the podium like a general addressing her troops. She clicked through a PowerPoint presentation filled with photos of my house, the turquoise door, the wildflower garden, and of course, the newly erected above-ground pool. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone grave, "we are facing a crisis. One homeowner has chosen to disregard the principles that make Maplewood Hills a desirable place to live." I raised my hand. "Karen, you're making it sound like I'm planning to build a theme park. It's just a pool." "A pool today, Alex," she shot back, "and who knows what tomorrow? Neon lights, loud parties, property values will plummet." Several neighbors nodded in agreement, but others looked uncomfortable. Karen's rhetoric was divisive, and I realized I needed allies. After the meeting, I approached a few of my more reasonable neighbors. "You don't really think my house is ruining the neighborhood, do you?" I asked. Mrs. Jenkins, a sweet elderly woman, shook her head. "Oh, Alex, I think your garden is lovely. Karen's just very passionate." "Passionate is one word for it," I muttered. Word spread quickly about Karen's antics. A few neighbors even stopped by to express their support. Mr. and Mrs. Patel, who lived 2 doors down, offered to help me draft a letter to the HOA challenging Karen's authority. "She's overstepping," Mr. Patel said. "There are rules, yes, but they're not meant to suppress individuality." Together we combed through the HOA bylaws, highlighting vague clauses and contradictions. It became clear that Karen had been interpreting the rules to suit her agenda. Armed with this knowledge, I filed a formal complaint against her. The next HOA meeting was a spectacle. I presented my case, pointing out Karen's overreach and the lack of transparency in her actions. Karen, visibly flustered, tried to regain control. "This is about the good of the community," she insisted. "No, Karen," I countered. "This is about your need for control." The room erupted in murmurs. For the first time, Karen's grip on the neighborhood seemed to falter. But she wasn't done yet. In the weeks that followed, Karen escalated her tactics. She hired a private inspector to scrutinize my property for code violations. The inspector found nothing significant, but Karen used the report to issue a new round of warnings. She also began spreading rumors, suggesting I was planning to rent my house to undesirable tenants. I fought back with facts and a healthy dose of humor. I started a neighborhood newsletter, playfully titled Turquoise Times, where I chronicled Karen's antics and shared updates on my garden and pool. It was a hit, and more neighbors began to see Karen's behavior for what it was, a power trip. Still, the situation took a toll. I found myself constantly on edge, wondering what Karen would do next. One evening, as I sat on my porch, Mr. Patel stopped by with some unexpected news. "Alex," he said, "a few of us have been talking. We think it's time for a change in leadership." "You mean?" I began. "A recall vote," he confirmed. The idea of ousting Karen from her throne brought a spark of hope. The recall process was straightforward. Gather signatures from 25% of the HOA members and call for a special election. Over the next few weeks, I worked tirelessly with the Patels and other supporters, knocking on doors, explaining Karen's overreach, and collecting signatures. The more we shared our stories, the more people joined our cause. Karen, of course, caught wind of our efforts. She doubled down on her tactics, sending out newsletters filled with dire warnings about the chaos that would ensue without her leadership. She even went as far as to accuse me of vandalizing her property, an allegation that was quickly debunked thanks to security camera footage. The day of the recall vote was tense. The community hall was packed, with neighbors lining up to cast their ballots. Karen delivered an impassioned speech, painting herself as the guardian of Maplewood Hills. But her words rang hollow to many who had grown tired of her tyranny. When the votes were tallied, the result was clear. Karen was out. The room erupted in cheers, and for the first time in months, I felt a weight lift my shoulders. But Karen wasn't ready to accept defeat. She stormed out of the hall, vowing to fight the decision. True to her word, she filed a lawsuit against the HOA, claiming the recall was illegitimate. The legal battle dragged on for months, creating tension within the neighborhood. Despite the chaos, the new HOA leadership, led by Mr. Patel, worked tirelessly to restore harmony. They revised the bylaws to prevent future abuses of power, promoted community events to rebuild trust, and encouraged open dialogue among neighbors. Slowly but surely, Maplewood Hills began to heal. As for Karen, her lawsuit was eventually dismissed, and she quietly moved out of the neighborhood. Her house was sold to a young couple who transformed it into a vibrant, welcoming home. The transformation felt symbolic of the neighborhood's new chapter. Looking back, the ordeal was exhausting, but it taught me the importance of standing up for what's right. Maplewood Hills was no longer just a place to live. It was a community worth fighting for. With Karen gone and her grip on Maplewood Hills broken, the neighborhood began to rediscover itself. The scars of the long and contentious battle lingered, but they were soon overshadowed by the fresh energy of new beginnings. The new HOA leadership wasted no time in turning the page. Under Mr. Patel's guidance, the bylaws were thoroughly reviewed and rewritten. The vague and oppressive clauses that Karen had weaponized were replaced with clear, concise, and fair guidelines. One of the first changes was the introduction of a mediation process, ensuring that future disputes would be resolved with dialogue rather than conflict. The sense of relief among the neighbors was palpable. Longtime residents who had once tiptoed around Karen's authoritarian tendencies began to relax and engage more openly. A block party was organized to celebrate the neighborhood's new chapter. It was the first of its kind in years, and the turnout was overwhelming. Children played on the lawns, music filled the air, and the scent of grilled burgers and hot dogs wafted through the streets. For the first time, Maplewood Hills felt like a true community. As for me, I found myself unexpectedly at the center of this revival. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance now stopped by to chat or compliment my garden. Some even pitched in to help me install a new pergola over my pool, turning it into a communal gathering spot. The turquoise door that had once symbolized defiance now became a symbol of individuality and freedom. One of the most heartwarming changes was the reintegration of those who had felt marginalized by Karen's rule. Mrs. Jenkins, the elderly neighbor who had expressed support for me early on, became a beloved figure at neighborhood events. The Patel family spearheaded an initiative to create a community garden, drawing in residents of all ages and backgrounds to contribute and share in the harvest. But the transition wasn't without its challenges. Karen's lawsuit, though dismissed, had left behind legal fees that the HOA had to address. A special meeting was called to discuss how to handle the financial strain. While some suggested raising HOA dues temporarily, others proposed hosting fundraisers to cover the costs. In the end, the community decided on a mix of both, with neighbors volunteering to organize bake sales, car washes, and even a talent show. During this time, I discovered an unexpected talent for storytelling. Inspired by my experiences, I started writing a column for the Turquoise Times, which had grown from a playful newsletter into a beloved neighborhood staple. My columns chronicled not just the drama with Karen, but also the small, everyday moments that made Maplewood Hills special. The newsletter became a way for neighbors to connect, celebrate milestones, and share their own stories. As the months passed, Karen's memory faded. Her house, now painted a cheerful yellow with a white picket fence, became a symbol of renewal. The new owners, Emily and Chris, were a young couple with a toddler and a golden retriever. They embraced the community wholeheartedly, hosting movie nights on their lawn and inviting neighbors over for coffee. One day, as I sat on my porch sipping iced tea, Emily stopped by with a batch of homemade cookies. She looked at my turquoise door and smiled. "I love what you've done with your house," she said. "It's so full of personality." "Thank you," I replied, feeling a surge of pride. "It's nice to finally feel at home here." Reflecting on the journey, I realized how much I'd grown. The battle with Karen had been exhausting, but it had also brought out a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. More importantly, it had shown me the value of community and the power of standing up for what you believe in. As for Maplewood Hills, it was thriving. The new bylaws fostered a spirit of inclusivity and respect, allowing residents to express themselves while maintaining harmony. The block parties became a regular tradition, and the community garden flourished. The neighborhood, once overshadowed by fear and division, had transformed into a place of warmth and camaraderie. Looking back, I wouldn't have changed a thing. Karen's reign had been a dark chapter, but it had ultimately led to a brighter future. Maplewood Hills was more than just a collection of houses. It was a family, and for that, I was grateful.